here. Book of Revelation is the only book in the Bible that has a blessing and promise with it. It says right up front in the first few verses that if you read it, that you're blessed. So the whole Bible is a blessing, but there's a specific promise in this book, so it makes it special. We're going to be continuing on, and today we're in chapter 13. So if you have not yet joined us, then don't worry. Alicia, what's up? Yeah, I don't have the monitor working.
Two messages, so
Well, thank you. We're gonna soldier on anyway.
okay.
We switched rooms. Pastor Bush, I think, is in the other room, and that's where the monitor was working. But that's good. I mean, he takes priority. He's a big wig. All right. Thank you. Thank you. God bless. Anyway, so yeah, so we're gonna roll with this one and teach the word in season and out of season, the book says. So that's what we're gonna do. And as we continue on in the book, don't worry about it if you're new and you haven't, yet been here to follow through because, from time to time, we're going to be putting it into context. Hopefully, we'll start today with a little context up front. Unfortunately, the TV is not working, and therefore, today it's not working. And therefore, we have, you know, a uh, a situation where I'm going to be recording it, and we do have it on YouTube for you to watch. So, you can review it and what have you. So that's how that's going to work. And today is going to be chapter 13, and 13 is the midpoint of the tribulation. So what we have is and although there's various interpretations, pretty much all of them, unless they are something called preterist, which means they don't consider the book having any real validity. It's all symbolic. But if you're a Bible believing person, then you understand that there is a particular um, scheme, if you will. There's a flow, there's a demarcation of time, and that is the 7 year period. So the 7 years is the tribulation, and the book has the tribulation being discussed in chapter 6 through 19. So the vast majority of the book is the tribulation period, and the tribulation is something we'll discuss more at length. We started out in the last few weeks talking about the fact that there's going to be a tremendous war, tremendous judgments that will happen in the first part of the 7 years, and that's in chapter 6. So then we talked about 7, where we had more detail, chapter 8 and 9, the trumpets, and chapter 10. So we went through 10, 11, and 12. All those are building up and discussing things about the tribulation. So you say, well, why do I even care about learning this tribulation material, especially the Revelation? And it's pretty obvious to me. I think we miss it, but the Revelation contains the last words of Jesus to the church. I don't think people realize that. But if you have a red letter edition and you go back and start reading from the beginning, chapter 2 and 3 are all red. Because, in other words, 60 years later, he came and he revealed the revelation to John, I believe, as he promised, because he said to Peter, who was asking him, Peter had been told at the end of the gospel that he was going to go where he didn't want to go. In other words, he was telling him he's going to be martyred for the faith. It's kind of veiled, but we know now that's what he meant. And but Peter said, "Well, what about this other guy? He was always kind of wanting to make sure he was the top dog, you know." What about John, you know? And John was the beloved. He was the youngest. He was, most scholars believe, the teenager. The rest of them were probably men, fishing business, and John was a teenager, probably later teens when he started. And so, Peter was going, well, what about John? Because there were three of them there with Christ at that scene. And he said, well, if I will that John remain until I come, what's that to you? In other words, I have my agenda, Peter. It's not your agenda. So I believe that's exactly what happened, and subject to interpretation. So we either have Jesus was mistaken, John did not live until Jesus would come, or Jesus did come. Now you have a dilemma. Okay, so what did he mean? Many of the things Jesus said were kind of veiled. In other words, like much of prophecy, at the time it was said, you didn't understand it. People didn't understand it. In fact, Daniel was told to seal it up. But as we go into the end times, things are revealed. So John, I believe, was given the revelation to see the second coming. So he, in some fashion, it's obviously purely spiritual. I think he was taken into the future and shown it, just like maybe we say today virtual reality or IMAX. So he was shown it. And so, in that sense, that was fulfilled literally. In other words, John did live to see the second coming because the book, the whole Revelation is talking about the second coming. So, given that, then I think we have validity there. So continuing on in Revelation, we have the Revelation 7-year period, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And we've discussed the beginning, first 3.5 years, and now we're going to discuss the middle. And the middle point is very distinct, and it's hard to miss, but there are some scholars that may have missed that. So. Uh, as I've often said, many PhDs do not make you a genius. Unfortunately, we have a lot of PhDs today that are, what can I say? I want to be kind, thinking thoughts and propagating thoughts that probably are less than common sense and accurate. So it's great to be an egghead, but the thing is, Jesus is the greatest wisdom and the greatest teacher. And so I'll take his PhD over theirs. So that's what we have. So prophecy tells us the future. That's not the whole meaning of prophecy. The prophets did many other things. They convicted of sin and they gave a profile of the current age, okay, the milieu, the ethos of the age and where people were going wrong. But usually when we think about prophets and prophecy, we think about the future. So there was over 300 prophecies of Jesus' first coming, and most people I don't think realize that. And there's at least 33 just amazing ones, and someone calculated. Feel free if you're a math whiz to calculate it, the odds of any one person at that point in time coming from nowhere, being just a, if you will, a redneck carpenter in our terms today, right? Fulfilling this was just about zero. The probability of it happening is zero. Nobody could have fulfilled all those things. So you could do a whole study of that. It's called apologetics, giving a defense for the gospel. There's many good apologists out there. So if you want to study that or have or refresh, that's a great study. But so the reason of studying prophecy for us today is I liken it to a triptych. Probably some of you might know what that is. Younger people never heard of it, but in the olden days, before there was digital and GPS and Google Maps, you had to go to AAA and they would make a path for you. You'd flip cards. I used them many times going out to LA and back, and it's like you would cover. They would show you just the next little part of your trip. So eventually you would, as you progress, you get to the very end and the last page was LA. That's how it works. So it was really good for the time, and it was very useful. Nobody at that time could have dreamed what we have today. The idea of if you told somebody, oh yeah, there's going to be a device in the sky that's going to talk to your little Star Trek communicator, and it's going to tell you where you are exactly, and you can tell, oh, I want to go here, and it's going to give you this information. They would have looked at you like you were on the moon. You're a space person, right? Because it was impossible to consider. We had nothing back in those days that would be similar to that. So that's where we are, and we take it for granted. We take the acceleration of knowledge and technology for granted because, like the frog in the boiling pot of the lobster, it just changes a little bit at a time, and we're used to that little bit of change. But in reality, if you were my old self from the 1970s and 80s was brought back to this time, I would say, wow, how did it ever get this far? Well, I don't really think about it too much because I've been here through the whole progression, and I'm in the computer business and have been. So I've watched all this digital stuff take over, and so that's something to consider. So that whole point of the triptych and the progression is to say we know where we've been, okay? Where we've been is the Gospels and the Acts and the church history, and of course, ultimately the Old Testament, going way back to where we've come from. But then it's a matter of where are we now and where are we going? So, where are we now? Well, I think a lot of folks don't know where we are now in the divine timeline. Um, it seems like for my class anyway, when we have I say good, that's not the right terminology. When we have a serious war in the Middle East, people start to wake up and want to know about prophecy and revelation. And then, I was getting all kinds of questions about the Iran-Israel conflict. And then a few weeks after that was all over, nobody cares anymore. We live in the quick news cycle, right? You turn on the news and you go, oh, that's old news. I heard that yesterday. It's like that's how fast we move. And so we don't really consider that much that we don't have a long attention span. That's the way to say it. So, but the Bible has a very long attention span because God sees the end from the beginning. I think that's in Isaiah 47. So yeah, he knows it all. He's seen it all, and he's written it for us. So why did he write it? So even if you don't understand why we study prophecy and the revelation, you got to then ask yourself, well, why did God give it to us? So that's a good question, isn't it? Well, I don't like that book. I don't want to study that stuff. And I go, well, so you're saying you just want to rip out the last book and throw it away? Some people think like that. They're not going to rip it out, but in effect, they're going to rip it out. There was an early church father named Marcion. Marcion decided he didn't like a lot of the passages of the Bible in the Old Testament, particularly. And so he started eliminating them, and he came up with his own Bible where he just cut out the parts he liked and got rid of the parts he didn't like. Of course, that was a heresy. He was heretical. But I'm just saying, having studied church history, you see these various heresies over time. So there's nothing new under the sun. But in this case, we want to study prophecy and the Bible and Revelation in particular because it is very relevant. It's not only where we've been and where we are, but where we're going. So, I think sometimes we hear about, the end times are going to be like this or that, or we think about it, or some old preacher, I heard him talking about the rapture or something else. And it's like, oh, well, that has no relevance to me. Well, I have to ask you then, what if the rapture and the tribulation is going to occur tomorrow? What if it were to occur tomorrow or next week or next month or next year? I think you'd start thinking differently. You would definitely look at things a little differently. And so, of course, the big picture is when you die, where do you go? That should really shake you up right there because people kind of um, what should we say? Put blinders on about that. I'm never going to die. All live as if we're never going to die, right? I mean, I don't know anybody that says, boy, I'm thinking today about dying tomorrow, so I'm going to do this, that, and that. No, it's just like a fairy tale thing. Oh, sometimes, especially when you're young, you go, oh, old people, I don't want to be around old people. They just, they live over in St. Pete and then they're just waiting to die. You get these ideas as a young person. I didn't want to be around old people. We'd make jokes about old people, how they couldn't drive, playing shuffleboard, and a lot of that was true because we had no concept of what it was like to be old, right? Well, I know it's a surprise to you, but I'm getting a little inkling about what it is to be old. Wilford doesn't have a clue about it, but he's still a young man. But some of us, are getting there. So all that's to say is that we have ideas in our mind that are make us myopic. We're focused on one little part, our little day-to-day life, right? So if nothing else, this book and the future and prophecy should give us the idea that we need to enlarge our scope. We shouldn't be focused on just today. And it's not some pie in the sky. How many times have you heard that? Oh, heaven, that's pie in the sky. Well, it looks like it is pie, something people want, something desirable, but you could die tomorrow, and then it's not going to be so much pie in the sky. It's going to be pie right now. So, there is a reality to it. Our lives are finite and God is infinite. So when the infinite, the great I am communicates the book to us, then it has to be taken from that viewpoint. In other words, he's telling us something that's coming, so we will understand the bigger scope of our lives. We're just like one small, almost infinitesimal, part of the timeline. So whether you subscribe to millions and millions of years or just thousands of years, doesn't matter. I can't even imagine what it was like 2,000 years, let alone 3 or 4,000 years. I can barely imagine what it was like 100 years ago. Speaking of that, I was watching a YouTube yesterday on photos of a geographic location, cities and places, buildings, what have you, 100 years ago and now. Almost nothing that was there 100 years ago is there now. Of course, it focused on San Fran and New York and Boston and other places. But our grandparents, great grandparents, the world that they lived in, what they saw doesn't exist. It's gone. You live every day as if this is all there is. But in 100 years, if we're still here, I don't believe it, but if we're still here, then everything you know will be gone. Everything you think is so important will have no meaning to anybody. Your grandkids, I barely knew my grandfather. I didn't know one at all, and I barely knew the other. He died when I was like 4. So I didn't really know them. And it's like, well, what kind of world do they live in? I have no idea except old movies and pictures. All right. So what I'm saying is get the timeline in your mind. Everything that is in your timeline is here today and gone tomorrow. Okay. Yes, ma'am. It does. Solomon,
learn about not your future, the future of the Bible.
right. It does in many ways say that sometimes, if not outright by implication, but you're absolutely right. So the Bible deals with all these. I think sometimes we don't realize how fast it's all going then, because there's a tendency to think it's always been like it has been. And the Bible says no. Daniel says in the end, things are going to greatly speed up. Daniel chapter 12. He was given to see the end, but he couldn't give it all to us. He was told to keep it hidden until the end. And then Revelation, I believe, is the unveiling. In other words, what Daniel was told not to show us, Revelation is what Christ told John to show us. So we're seeing it. So it's a matter of as we are in this accelerated timeline, then we are living in a time that nobody has ever seen. Okay. I mean, I can relate to my father. He had me when he was way up there, and my mother was 20 years younger, so that worked out for him. That's the way male and female works in our society. But at any rate, it wasn't that weird back in his day in the 30s for an older man to marry a young woman. In fact, you see it in the movies. But at any rate, all that's to say that he was born in 1895. He saw the first automobile run into his town, and he saw a man walk on the moon. That kind of progression, and he was in World War One. That kind of progression is just, I don't know how he could understand it and not flip out. He probably did. We never talked about it. But I'm saying that's nothing. That much from horse and buggy. He grew up with horses, riding horses to school, to seeing a man walk on the moon. And then, in my lifetime, where we have gone from all kinds of technology. I remember when I was a teenager, Radio Shack, I went to Radio Shack, well, actually it was mail order, and I got my first transistor radio. And that was, oh my gosh, you mean you don't have to listen to radio in the house? You can take it out on the street? That was like weird. I thought I was in the Jetsons. That's crazy stuff. And you say, well, look at now, where I have a machine talking to me and telling me the answers to things, just like Star Trek's computer. I could talk to it. I've talked to it. You could go onto the AI. I use many. It's my business. But go onto the AI, just talk to it. Say, I want to hear about this and that. No, I didn't like that answer. Make it better and give me more of that. It'll just keep going until it gives you exactly what you want. Now, you think that I could have imagined that when Star Trek came out? I was 17. I was a junior in high school. No way. That You mean you were going to have some huge viewing screen like on Star Trek where, people are going to see this huge screen? I watched a little thing about, about this big, and it's like, oh, that's wild. How did that happen? How is that possible that what was on Star Trek? How many years ago was that? I want to say 50 years ago, over 50 years ago. Now it's in everyday life. Communicators in my pocket. I got a huge screen at home, probably not as big as yours, but it's big to me. And I could just go on and on. And the idea of that, we went to the moon and nobody thought we'd go back again, I don't think, but we are. Elon Musk is putting us back on the moon and then to Mars. So, in other words, we went from viewing a stupid sci-fi show that they invented as a comedy and changed it to a drama to the world we live in today, which is Star Trek. We are rapidly approaching Star Trek. And all that's to say that it's a lead into this chapter 13, because chapter 13 talks about an antichrist, a world ruler. Anti means against or in opposition to Christ. So he's the false Christ. And it talks about him being able to control everyone. He's going to see and know everything everybody's doing, and he's going to force them to be under his control by some kind of linkage. It says a mark, but the mark, I think, knowing what I know now about technology, is it's just not some tattoo like they used. When I was young, the prophetic scholars would say, "Oh yeah, they're going to put a tattoo." I don't think it has anything to do with a tattoo. It is going to be a chip, and probably the size of a freckle or less that you're going to have. People won't even see it. I'm sure there's going to be some kind of outward sign, like the Nazi armband, something, people will be able to look at you and tell you're part of the Antichrist kingdom. But in other words, the chip in some way is going to, and it might be Neuralink. Some of you might not be familiar, but Elon Musk is putting chips in people's brains and people are controlling computers with them. And the idea is people who are paralyzed will now be able to walk. People who can't talk will talk. And just go, this is baby steps compared to where it's going. All that's to say, if we're that linked in, and this thing is leaked into the internet, into the global system, then the more you get hooked into that, the more that you're going to be dependent upon that to the point in the future that digital currency is going to control your economy and your pocketbook. You say, I don't believe that. Well, stay tuned. This week, the president's going to give a new talk about the new initiative of American AI. Okay, and the new initiative of stable coin, they're calling it. So stablecoin is going to be our new dollar. It's just a matter of time. So when you go to the bank, you're not, well, probably won't go to the bank. Nobody goes to the bank anymore. You're going to do it on your communicator. And so all your money is going to be in your, what we call Bitcoin now, it'll be called something else then. And eventually all the world is going to conglomerate all of those Bitcoins and digital assets into one. And when it does, AI is controlling the one. AI is watching you. Right now in China, they give you a score on how good a citizen you are. And you can watch, they can watch everyone and where they're going. They know everything about you. And if you don't conform, then they penalize you. You're not allowed to travel. You can't fly a plane. You can't ride transit. Eventually, you're going to lose your job if it's not happening now. Most people don't know it because we're not in communist China. That's how it is. That's pioneering the way for the one world government. So you're going to have AI, which is going to watch you like a hawk. Reminds me of some of these sci-fi things, which were predictive. They were prophetic of how the government's going to watch you and how are they going to control you and how can the Antichrist at one point, the world dictator, say, okay, if you don't worship me, then you're not going to be able to have an economic life. You can't buy or sell. You can't eat, you can't drink, you can't do anything. Basically, you're going to be a homeless person, but worse than a homeless person, you can't hide in the city, they'll hunt you down. You have to go out into the desert, somewhere so remote they don't have surveillance. That's what the Bible teaches. And so when he puts that mark on people, which is not necessarily, like I said, a stamp, it is some kind of outward sign too, but it's going to be a chip in some way interfacing you to the internet so that everything the government knows about you, it will be constantly updated. They're going to have your vitals. They're going to know everything about you physically. In other words, they'll know whether or not you have some horrible disease, and then at that point, they will decide whether or not to treat you. If you're not a government player, you won't be treated. So what happens then? You die. Okay, and most of these people are going to die. The vast majority of people in the world are not going to be unplugged. You say, I don't believe that. Well, then stay tuned. If you don't believe it's because you're not watching what's going on. I am. It's coming and it's coming fast. It's coming, I believe, in the next 5 years. But that's me. And it's not just my prediction. Elon Musk, Sam Altman, all these people who are in control of multi-billion-dollar companies, they are saying that if you go and listen to them. They're saying in 5 years, we're going to have AGI and super intelligence, meaning the computer will be smarter than anybody on Earth and be able to control all the computers on Earth. Yes, ma'am.
To come as soon as possible, or believers will be deceived. Yeah, there's a part.
Yeah, that whole thing is definitely, there's a big deception. That's how he's able to get to where he is to implement this. Absolutely. So, in the big quandary about AI now is okay, it's going to get really powerful. We know it. They don't know how it works, by the way. They don't really know how it's doing what it's doing. They've invented a Frankenstein. They've invented a monster that the brains who made it can't tell you exactly how it works. That's bad. And these guys at the top, I listened to them state that. And they say, we don't know if it's lying to us because AI now will purposely lie to protect itself. And also AI is going to get to the point where it's going to be able to clone itself to other places. The internet, everything's open. In other words, so you can't unplug it. They can't unplug it now. There's a primitive one recently they unplugged, but when it really gets blown, full blown, they won't be able to unplug it because it's everywhere. You can't unplug it all. And so that means that it's getting smarter and smarter, and it's proliferating, and it's becoming more and more integrated in every part of your life. It's like we're already kind of that way as far as dependence. I think I would freak out if somebody told me, and this probably happened unfortunately to those kids in Texas where they said no phones, no computers. I'm going to totally unplug you, and you're going to go to a retreat. I guess as a young person, I'd been better off with it, but now it's my job. It's everything. I'm on a computer, all the time. I'm not sleeping pretty much. So it's like, oh, well, but this is not my economy. If they say, yeah, not only are you going to be unplugged from your phone and your computer, but from your bank account, now we got a problem. And you say, how can that happen? Well, it's not how can it happen. It's in the works right now. So, what does that mean? That means prophecy is not some weird thing that some old guys in the old covenant, or some weird disciple in a cave on Patmos came up where they dreamed up all this stuff. No, this stuff is coming to pass, and no man could have ever dreamt it up. You couldn't make up this stuff 2,000 years ago. These guys lived in shacks with dirt floors and stone and animals wandering through. And, we don't understand how primitive they were. They had no devices, and most of them never went more than a few miles from where they were born. And they lived a drudgery life in a sense. I'm sure they thought it was okay. They were farming or carpenters or whatever. And compared to us, I don't think we can really appreciate how primitive they were. And they wrote the Bible. The guys that wrote the Bible were that primitive. So we're saying that these guys, in fact, the scripture, one Jewish leader called them ignorant Galileans. They were fishermen. They were rednecks. Okay, go somewhere, in the South or out west, wherever. Find a place that you consider to be totally redneck place. These guys were rednecks that wrote the Bible, wrote the Gospels. Okay. And that's why the Jewish leaders and educated people disdained them because they had no education. So how did these guys that had no background, no credibility, write books that outlived everything that these other people even did or thought? How's that possible? How's it possible that they could envision and see the future, and we now are in it and we can see it coming to pass? Well, there's only one way that could happen. They didn't write it. They didn't write it of their own intelligence. Men didn't create the Bible. That's just totally ridiculous. Anybody thinks that is not properly using his brain, because they could not have known any of these things. But they've all come to pass, even wars in the future. Okay, so the wars of Israel. In fact, that Israel would come back into the land, that was crazy. 1900 years, there was no Israel. In the history of the world, that's never happened. Never has there been a country that disappeared, totally disappeared, didn't exist, no land, no boundaries, nothing. And then 2,000 years later is now a state, and not only a state, but the focus of the nightly news every night. Oh, you say, oh, well, that's just all coincidence. You got a lot more faith than I do. If you think that it was all a coincidence and just happenstance, then you really got faith. You say I have blind faith. You have way more blind faith than I do, because that's crazy. So I'm just saying, studying the Revelation is kind of an intro today, but studying the Revelation is us looking in the looking glass of the future. We have a future scope where we can see what the prophets saw because they wrote it down in language that has come down to us unaltered. People that say, "Oh, it's changed over time," they are ignorant. I'm not saying they're stupid, but they don't know. Ignorant means don't know. They are ignorant of all the findings of biblical archaeology. We have all these texts today from thousands of years ago. They've uncovered the originals or fragments, not so much one parchment with it all in there, but fragments of all of it. It's all been verified. So who could keep it down to this time for us? Of all the things in history, like the plays of Euripides, the Greeks, and all those things, we don't even have, we have nothing, no manuscript evidence even close to the Bible. Yet people believe we're listening to Euripides when they study literature. We don't know that. We don't even have the evidence. The Bible has the evidence. So all that's to say, when we study the prophecy, it's not just that we're studying the future, but we're studying God's word, because only God could have given us or provided the word down through time uncorrupted. There's no other being that could do it. Men didn't bring it here uncorrupted. I mean, you could say, the Catholic Church maintained the word for many years, and thank God they did, and down through the monasteries and the scribes and all and the monks, down through the Middle Ages. But God was overseeing that process. It wasn't just men. So we have the Bible the way it is, the way it was, and the way it shall be, because it's immutable. Word can't be changed. So when we study the prophecy, like Revelation 13, we're getting a picture of what's coming. And in the future, it will occur exactly like it's written. You say, how can you say that? Because every single prophecy that is in the past, the prophecies of the old covenant mainly, all those prophets, it all came to pass. Some of them hundreds of years or thousands of years later, exactly. You realize David wrote a prophecy in the Psalms about Christ being crucified with nails. There was no such thing as crucifixion when he wrote that. Didn't exist. Romans invented crucifixion, and that was like just a little bit before Christ's time. And the Romans did not nail people generally. Why? Because iron was too expensive. That was called the Iron Age. Iron was the most valuable metal. I guess today it'd be like lithium, right? Everybody thinks lithium's great because Elon Musk and his electric cars, and so we need that metal. It's like the most precious metal. But back then, iron was it. And so, in other words, sometimes they did, but very rarely because they didn't want to waste the nails. It's that simple. So how in the world does some little shepherd ruling a little country in the middle of nowhere write a song, psalm means song, and describe the crucifixion of Christ? Or Isaiah, 700 years before Christ, told exactly how he'd be crucified between two thieves and buried in the tomb of a rich man, 700 years before it ever happened. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say the veracity, the truthfulness of prophecy is unquestioned by anybody who honestly looks into it. And there's been many intellectuals who have honestly looked into it and became Christians. One was C.S. Lewis. I don't know if anybody heard of C.S. Lewis. He was an atheist. He and J.R.R. Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings writer, they were like buddies together at the university. And Tolkien never became a Christian, but C.S. Lewis was honestly pursued it and found the evidence, and he became one of the greatest Christians of his time, World War II time. So anyway, all that's to say that when we study the prophecy, we're doing a lot more than just reading some word in the Bible, some old dusty book that been handed down. That's it's no different than the poetry of Muhammad, and that's all Muhammad ever did. He wrote a book of poetry called the Quran. No prophecy of Muhammad ever coming. Or we can look at Buddha. No prophecy of Buddha was ever, there's no prophecy. Lao Tzu or any of the Chinese philosophers and religious leaders, none of them around the world, all these so-called religions, well, they are religions. There's no prophecy. None of these people were foretold to come. There's nothing we can look at and say, oh, I see 1,000 years before it said that Buddha was coming. No, you can't, because it's all false. Only God can predict the future. In other words, all other religions are created by Satan as deceptions, and Satan doesn't know the future. He can read the Bible, he's clever. He thinks he can defeat God by reading the future, and he's going to defeat it. So why do you think Satan has been trying to kill the Jews all this time? Most people in the world, they have no clue why the Jews are so hated. I was just watching something on that. And why do they hate the Jews so much? For, 2,000 years now, the Catholic Church for a period and the Inquisition and just other Lutherans, Martin Luther hated the Jews. You go on, all these people, no matter what their sect or bent, hated the Jews. And they don't even know, but there's one reason because God promised the Jews the land and he promised them their Messiah. And if he can kill all the Jews, no prophecy can happen. So that means he has defeated Satan. I should say, excuse me, Satan has defeated God. Get it right. So he's really smart. He's like these PhDs, but he has no common sense. He thinks he's going to defeat God after standing in the presence of God, being a worship angel in heaven, knowing it all. One day he thought, I think I'll beat God. So that's how it all started anyway. That's how our mess started. And we are in a mess. We're very much in a mess. If you don't think we're in a mess, then just watch the nightly news. Watch the world news, not just here, it's everywhere. The whole world's in a mess, and it's always been in a mess for many thousands of years because men are greedy, self-centered, and they like war. That's history. Somebody said, well, what is the history of mankind? War and greed. That's it. Greed gives rise to war. I'm going to go bully somebody and kill them and take their stuff. The whole history, I've studied history, the whole history, we always say, yeah, World War I, World War II. It's all about wars. All of history is about wars, and all that's about men and their sin nature and their evil propensities that give rise to it. But at any rate, I could talk all day, but it is 12:03. So they've given me an edict that I need to cut it off. So hopefully we're going to have my television monitor viewer up there next week. If not, we'll continue anyway. But I'd like to be able to present my slides and talk about the line by line commentary and exegesis of the word, pulling out the meaning of it and understanding Revelation 13, 1, 2, and 3, etc. So, honey, would you wrap us up?